Once upon a time, in a galaxy far, far away, on a planet surrounded by rings of blue light, there lived aliens called the Lunis. They were small, with thin, transparent bodies that glowed from within with a soft, heavenly light. Their eyes were large and dark, like two mirrors that reflected everything around them. The Lunis did not speak like humans, but communicated through thoughts and light, creating complex patterns and images that conveyed their feelings and ideas. The Lunis lived in harmony with the nature of their planet, and their civilization was focused on space exploration. They did not build large cities, but they created giant crystal domes in which it was convenient to observe the stars. They believed that the universe was a huge book written in light, and that each new look at it opened a new page. One day, during one of their observations, a group of Lunis noticed a strange signal coming from an unknown part of space. This signal was unusual. It was like a mixture of music and lightning that tore through the sky. The aliens decided to go in that direction to figure out its source. Their journey was long and dangerous. The path was strewn with black holes and asteroid fields, but the Lunis were experienced travelers, and every step they took was precise. Finally, they arrived at a place where the signal was especially strong and discovered a gigantic creature floating in the void. It was an ancient creature with a body like a jellyfish, but with wings that sparkled like cosmic rain. The creature turned out to be the keeper of knowledge about the universe. It was old, very old, and told the Lunis how billions of years ago the universe was one and whole. However, over time, it began to split into parts, creating many worlds, each of which was unique and self-sufficient. The creature passed on some of its knowledge to the Lunis so that they could return home and preserve this legacy, not forgetting the true nature of the universe. Returning to their planet, the Lunis became scientists and philosophers. They used the knowledge they had gained to develop their civilization to unprecedented heights. They no longer sought conquest or expansion of their territory, but dedicated their lives to studying how the universe connects everything that exists through light and energy. And although none of the Lunis ever saw that ancient being again, his message became the basis of their wisdom. After all, they understood that the universe is not just space, but a living organism in which every element is connected to every other, and that light is what unites all worlds. Many years passed, and the Lunis became recognized masters not only in science, but also in art, including the art of communication. They learned to transmit their thoughts and feelings not only through light patterns, but also through music, which could be felt by other civilizations. Their music became known throughout the cosmos as something incredibly beautiful, capable of momentarily breaking the boundaries of time and space. However, one day, during another exploration of space, a group of Lunis encountered an unusual phenomenon. They discovered a massive object moving at incredible speed, as if it were driven by the very energy of the universe. The object was dark and mysterious. Its shape did not resemble any creature or ship known to them. It was like an extension of space, but at the same time its antipode, a void that swallowed everything around it. The Lunis decided to go to this object and explore it. As they approached, they felt a strange emptiness that literally filled their hearts with fear, but at the same time with an inexplicable feeling of affection. It was like meeting something deeply familiar, but at the same time completely alien. They sent out a signal trying to establish contact, but the response was unexpected. Instead of the usual patterns of light or sounds, they heard a strange silence, as if the universe itself had frozen in that moment. The Lunis continued to try to contact the object, until one of them felt a strange vibration coming from its heart. With this sensation came a revelation. This was not just a void. This was the source of the universe's power, the cosmos itself in its primordial form. And as it turned out, this object was nothing less than a guiding star, an entity that maintained balance in space and time. It was like a beacon that illuminated the path to understanding what lay beyond the visible. Suddenly, the Lunis realized that the ancient knowledge keeper they had met so many years ago was just a link in the chain that led to this object. The being they had met was part of a greater force that protected and guided all living things, like an invisible hand. The Lunis began to study this object more deeply and came to the conclusion that its influence extended throughout all galaxies. It was not destructive, as they had initially feared, but rather purifying, restoring balance. This object was an entity that maintained harmony and order, and its silence was not a sign of threat, but rather a protection that prevented minds and civilizations from destroying what had been established since the beginning of time. Having realized this, the Lunis decided to keep the secret of this object so as not to upset the balance of the universe. They became its guardians, and their music and light became a link between it and the rest of the world. Thus, the Lunis continued their mission, not just to study space, but also to maintain harmony in it. As time went on, the Lunis did not seek power or control. They were humble guardians of knowledge, understanding that their power lay in teaching others to be part of the universe, not trying to control it. And every time they looked at the stars, they knew that their world and their existence were but a small part of a greater cosmos that would never cease to amaze and fill them with light. Many years had passed since the Lunis became the guardians of the great cosmic object. Their civilization had flourished, yet they always felt that there was something more, something they did not yet understand in their deep connection to this object. They felt that there was a hidden truth that they were yet to discover. Their desire for knowledge had not waned, and even though they had become scholars and sages, their hearts remained full of questions. One day, at the most vivid moment of their observations, a strange signal came to their planet again, but this one was completely different. It was not musical, not light, but vibrated directly in their minds. It was not just a challenge, but as if a reminder that their journey was only just beginning. The signal came from the very object they were guarding, but now its power was stronger than ever. The Lunis decided to go to where the signal was strongest, to the very heart of the object, to understand its true purpose. They gathered in their crystal domes and, like threads of light, moved towards the source of the signal. As they approached the object, something extraordinary happened. A bright light appeared inside this dark creature, and it seemed as if the universe itself froze, waiting for their decision. They felt as if the space around them began to shrink, and as if they had become part of the object itself. It was as if they had become one particle of the cosmos itself. With each breath they took, space changed, and they found that they could no longer see the boundaries of the universe. They were not on their planet, not even in their galaxy. They were at the very center of everything that existed, in the vastness, where past and future intertwine, where every thought and every feeling becomes part of reality. Then one of the oldest Lunis, whose name was Iris, felt that their connection with this object was not accidental. This object was not just a beacon or a protector of the universe. It was the pulse of life itself in the entire universe, the very center that supports the existence of everything that exists. Its light and darkness were not opposites, but two sides of one essence, encompassing all worlds and realities. Iris realized that the object had been created billions of years ago, when the universe was just beginning to form. It was the result of the first explosion, not the one we all know as the Big Bang, but the primordial birth of energy that gave rise to life and death, light and shadow, order and chaos. It was the source that connected everything: time, space, life and death. The Lunis became its guardians because they were the ones with the ability to see and understand this balance. They realized that their task was not to explore space, but to guard this balance that sustains all that exists. They became part of this great pulse of the universe, feeling its breath in every cell of their bodies. They knew that they must now protect not only their planet or their civilization, but the entire cosmos from being disturbed by those who do not understand the true power hidden in this object. And so at that moment, Iris transmitted the knowledge to all the Lunis, and they became one with this object, inseparable from it. They were no longer just a race of aliens. They became the guardians of existence itself. Their light and darkness, music and silence all became part of the great symphony of the universe. Now, every time they looked at the stars, the Lunis knew that their task was not to seek answers, but to help other civilizations understand that true knowledge is not in the search for power, but in recognizing and preserving the balance that connects all worlds and all living things. And perhaps, someday, other civilizations will be ready to understand this truth, and they will become the guardians who will continue this endless cycle, connecting light and darkness, life and death, in harmony and peace. Many millennia passed, and the Lunis became the embodiment of the universe itself. They no longer existed as a separate race, but their essences became part of the cosmic pulse that maintained order in the vastness. All the knowledge they had accumulated over billions of years was transmitted through light and vibration into the structure of the very object they guarded. Their music and light now resounded not only in their planet, but in all worlds, in every galaxy, like invisible threads that tied everything together. However, time is not simply a linear movement forward. At some point, the Lunis felt something new. It was insignificant but still perceptible, a slight shift in balance. It was as if a subtle, barely noticeable but profound rift had appeared in the space between worlds. This rift was imperceptible to most civilizations, but for the Lunis, who were at the very center of the cosmos, it was like a crack in the very heart of their eternal harmony. They began to sense that somewhere, far out in the vastness, a new life form had appeared. Not intelligent, but incredibly powerful. It was not like living beings, like their race or other civilizations with whom they had had contact. It was something else. A being whose intelligence and energy violated the natural order of things. It did not seek knowledge or power. It did not seek to destroy or take over anything. It simply existed and grew, absorbing everything around it, like a black hole absorbing light, but without any apparent purpose. The Lunis traveled to this place, not knowing what awaited them. The journey was long and dangerous, and as they approached, their light began to fade. Around them, space and time began to warp, and every step they took became heavy, as if they were walking on the edge of destruction. When they arrived at the place where this creature had appeared, they realized that they had encountered something unknown, something that did not exist in their knowledge, something that did not obey even the most ancient laws of the cosmos. The creature was huge, elusive, and its presence was both oppressive and magical. It was not alive in the conventional sense, but it was not dead either. It was a giant ball of energy, a vortex that engulfed everything that came near it. It did not destroy, but transformed. Everything that fell into its center became part of it, changing and turning into something new. The Lunis realized that this creature could not be stopped by force or weapons. It existed outside the understanding they had brought to this universe. It was the result of nature itself, a clash of chaos and order that could not be avoided. But to their surprise, the Lunis found that this being began to send signals to them. They were not words or light, but rather deep impulses, sensations transmitted directly to their being. It was not a threat, but an invitation to understand what was happening in this new reality. The Lunis, guided by their sense of harmony, realized that the creature was not destruction, but a new stage in the development of the universe. It symbolized the transition from one state of being to another. It was not the opposite of what existed, but its complement, a necessary element for change and growth. It was not destruction, but a transformation that required new understanding. The Lunis decided not to fight this being, but to try to understand it, to combine their knowledge with its energy, to discover what it was that it was bringing to this world. They began to synchronize their light with this being, not with the goal of stopping it, but to understand its nature and to channel its power into a channel that could lead to a new level of existence. And so they became part of a new process, a new cycle that had begun the moment they first touched this being. They understood that their role was not to maintain an unchanging order, but to allow the universe to grow and evolve, opening up new horizons and possibilities for all forms of life. Thus, the Lunis began to work not only as guardians, but as change agents. Instead of trying to hold everything in place, they helped this being become part of a greater cosmic dance that changed the very essence of existence. And their light, although it had lost its former form, was now part of this endless process. And although the future remained unknown, the Lunis were sure of one thing: the universe would never be static. It would always change and evolve, and their role was to be part of this movement, which sometimes required destruction and sometimes creation. A few more centuries passed, and the universe did indeed begin to change. The Lunis, now the conduits of this new cycle, felt their essences merging with the very being they had once perceived as a threat. This being had become part of their collective, their consciousness, and they could no longer distinguish themselves from it. Their light, once soft and clear, was now tinged with the shadows and highlights of a new, unknown world. This process of transformation brought the Lunis to a new level of existence. They no longer perceived themselves as separate beings, but as a single network of energy and consciousness spreading throughout the universe. Their every move, their every decision, affected the flow of time and space. They began to perceive everything around them not as separate worlds and civilizations, but as interconnected parts of a single whole. With this new understanding, the Lunis decided to explore other worlds, and not just the ones they knew before. They traveled to the farthest reaches of the universe, to planets and galaxies that remained unexplored. But something strange happened. On one of these distant worlds, they discovered traces of another civilization, much older than their own. These traces were not just ruins or remnants. They were powerful structures that seemed to be waiting for them. When the Lunis began to investigate these mysterious objects, they discovered that they were part of a long-lost civilization that had also undergone a similar process. This was a race that had once merged with a cosmic entity similar to the one the Lunis had merged with. But as it turned out, their civilization could not withstand the changes, collapsing under the weight of the very force of transformation. They failed to understand that the truth was not in resistance, but in agreement with the flow of change. The Lunis, realizing that their path was not unique, but also very fragile, realized that they were on the brink of a new choice. And although they were no longer ordinary beings, but part of the cosmic fabric, they had to decide how to use their new power. They stood before the opportunity to begin a new cycle of development, but they also knew that, like everything in this vast cosmos, their decision would affect everything that exists. They began collecting data on those who had once followed their path and failed. They studied the ruined civilizations, their mistakes, their lessons. The Lunis came to the conclusion that the main thing is not just to survive the changes, but to understand their essence, to respect the balance and allow new forms of life and consciousness to take their part in this endless process. With each exploration, they increasingly felt their own understanding of transformation penetrate deeper into the very fabric of reality. They realized that they could not control the entire cosmos. Instead, they became its guides, helping civilizations who embark on this path to understand that true power lies not in controlling everything, but in helping the universe find its own path. Thus, the Lunis became not only guardians, but also mentors. They began to pass on their knowledge to those civilizations that were beginning to realize their connection with the cosmos. The Lunis were no longer just guardians. They were now part of a new movement of the universe, helping other beings to accept change and evolve without losing harmony. And though the future remained dark and unpredictable, the Lunis no longer feared it. They understood that the process of transformation was endless, and that the only truth that would always remain the same was that everything in this universe was connected. Light, darkness, life and death. All these elements must be in harmony, and their job was to maintain this balance, helping each creature find its way in this great symphony. Eventually, the Lunis realized that their existence, though infinite, would pass through many phases and changes, and that they were not the end, but part of an eternal cycle in which each moment and each entity had its value. They continued to travel the universe, witnessing its endless transformations, knowing that their light would always burn as long as there were worlds in which harmony could be found. Billions of years passed, and the Lunis continued their journey through the universe. They became increasingly indistinguishable from the cosmos itself, their essences intertwined with its energies, light and darkness, with every atom and molecule. However, one day, in a moment of deep silence, they felt something unusual, the disappearance of sound, light, even time itself. It was as if the universe froze for a moment, as if it was about to swallow itself. The Lunis realized that they had encountered something that was beyond their understanding. It was a new phenomenon, something that did not exist in their knowledge. Space and time began to disappear around them, consuming everything in their field of vision. It was not a dark being, not a rift, but something even more fundamental. A void that existed in itself, not as the absence of everything, but as a new state in which being and non-being merged into one. Not knowing what it was, the Lunis decided to explore this void, to enter it, and try to understand what was hidden behind this phenomenon. But as soon as they crossed its border, they felt their consciousness expand, becoming infinite. The void did not destroy them, but on the contrary, opened incredible horizons before them. In this void, the Lunis no longer felt like separate beings. They were not guardians or guides, but a part of something much greater, which could be the beginning or the end of everything. At that moment, the Lunis realized this was not just a void. This was the seed of a new cycle, a new universe that was about to be created, not in the form they were accustomed to, but in a completely new one. The Lunis felt their essences merging with this void, and images began to appear in their minds, strange and alien, but full of potential. These images were not words, were not images, but rather the very principles of existence, that were to become the basis of a new world. They realized that this was not the end, but the beginning. The void they had entered was not a final state, but an intermediate phase through which all cycles of life and death pass. It was a pause in the endless flow of existence, a moment when the laws of nature had not yet been determined, but the potential for all that could be already existed. It was a space for creation, where there was neither light nor darkness, neither life nor death. Here, everything was possible. And so, the Lunis, realizing that they were at the very core of everything that exists, became the creators of a new world. They began to recreate the universe, but now they did not build it according to old patterns, without restoring the previous order. They began to create something completely new, which had neither form nor final goals, but was open to infinite possibilities. Instead of being limited by the laws of physics, as they had been before, the Lunis began to introduce new principles. Light and darkness were no longer opposites, but aspects of a single force that interacted in this new space. Time was not linear, but flowed in spirals, intersecting and interpenetrating, creating multidimensional realities. And each of these realities could be home to completely different forms of life. Over time, the Lunis began to realize that their creation was not simply being created in a vacuum. It was alive. It was a universe in which life itself was part of the creative process. And each being, each consciousness, was not just an observer, but a creator, part of an infinite creation. The Lunis realized that they could not be the only creators of this new universe. They became teachers for those who would begin to create their own worlds and lives, passing on knowledge and wisdom that the true path is not to hold the universe, but to endlessly regenerate it, to support and expand it. The new cycle they began had no end. It was the beginning of a new era, when beings, whenever they appeared, could freely create and change their reality. And each new world would not just be part of this cycle, but a new chance for endless development. And the Lunis, standing at the center of this new creation, felt that their role was not to govern, but to inspire, teach, and transmit the consciousness that each of us is not just an element of the universe, but also a part of its eternal formation.